The Covenant from the Halo franchise have many staple member species, including the Elites, otherwise known as the Sangheili, the Grunts, otherwise known as the Ungoi, Jackals, and Hunters. But the Covenant also features several lesser-known species, including the Yon-Yet, and perhaps most interesting of all, the Sherikwoi. The Sherikwoi, otherwise known as the Drinals, are massive creatures inspired by the Hulks, otherwise known as the Drenial, from Marathon, the spiritual predecessor to Halo, developed by Bungie in the mid-90s. The Hulks were servants of the Four, Marathon's Covenant counterpart. The Sherikwoi were originally going to be in Halo CE. The creature again almost released in Halo 2, and the Halo 2 concept art for the creature looks like a one-to-one replica of the Marathon original. The first canon resource to officially reference the Sherikwoi was found in the Conversations of the Universe booklet that released alongside the special edition of Halo 2. But it wasn't until Halo Envoy all the way in 2017 that the Sherikwoi were described in detail. The Sherikwoi have thick, trunk-like legs. Their body and torso was comprised of heavy, bunched and corded musculature. Their fists are larger than a brute's head. Their hands feature bone spikes jutting out from out of them, a feature also seen in the original designs from Halo CE and the original Marathon games. These spikes were incredibly useful for the Drinal to impale their enemies. The creature featured jagged, razor-like teeth and featured what looked like a single cyclopean eye, but was in fact light grey bony tissue which would thump together, producing a loud sound which would reflect off of surfaces, in order to help the Sherikwoi map its surroundings in what was echolocation similar to bats. The Sherikwoi were effectively blind, but this mechanism allowed the Sherikwoi to be effective in dark or light conditions. This description of the Drinal's eye more closely resembles the original Halo Combat Evolved render than it does the original Hulk from Marathon. The Sherikwoi had grey leathery skin, which more closely resembles the Hulks from Marathon than the original tan-colored render from Halo Combat Evolved. The Sherikwoi were 5 meters tall, slightly taller than the height of 2 Spartans. The Covenant even designed the Hunter's armor to imitate the size and function of the Sherikwoi. Although the Sherikwoi are far more dangerous than the Hunters ever were, the Covenant had preserved only a tiny population of Sherikwoi, which had been set aside to target a planet with a high population. The idea was to drop Sherikwoi into a heavily populated area to ravage it, causing a serious blow to their enemies' morale. The Sherikwoi were so deadly that a single creature was able to kill 50 ODSTs. The Sherikwoi were literally engineered by the Forerunners to be the perfect soldier to fight the Flood, and it shows. The Sherikwoi are, for all intents and purposes, the physically strongest creature we've seen in the Halo universe thus far, perhaps more so than even the Gouda from Halo Reach, and they were apparently even immune to Flood infection, an incredibly rare trait in the Halo universe. The Sherikwoi were scarcely used in the war against the Flood, for unknown reasons. We can't really know why for certain, but I speculate it's because the Sherikwoi were invented late in the Forerunners' lifespan, and so their numbers weren't exactly high to begin with. The Forerunners stored the Sherikwoi in vast underground hives, and the Sherikwoi inside the hives were stored behind stasis fields, which sound highly reminiscent of the stasis fields we see on the Halo ring in Halo 2. The Sherikwoi hives were so massive they were believed to store hundreds of thousands of Sherikwoi. By default, the Sherikwoi were incredibly unintelligent and mindless creatures, but the Sherikwoi were given implants that could release synthetic hormones, like a synthetic pituitary gland or adrenal gland. These glands could communicate electrical signals through the brain. These implants could also send and receive a signal boosted by the armored Forerunner collar they were all wearing. These implants fed into a computational matrix that encompassed all Sherikwoi neural networks, which all connected to a central node in the network, a blue-gray crown with an embedded orb, which could be worn by any sentient life form. Once worn, the helmet dug itself into the skull of the life form, forging connections between itself and the neural tissue of the wearer, swelling the size of the creature's brain. This device allowed the Sherikwoi to be connected and controlled by a single individual, allowing the individual to see through their eyes, and making the Sherikwoi an extension of their will, similar to an ant queen and its ant colony, making the Sherikwoi the perfect soldier. The Vertex connected the neural networks of all the Sherikwoi via a quantum entanglement array. that allowed for FTL communication, the device even had an effective range of many light years, allowing remote control across the galaxy. Interestingly, the device, called a Vertex, contained a residue of the minds of all those who had previously worn the device, and left a residue of the current wearer's consciousness into the implants in all the Sharaquoi in its control. This is actually surprisingly similar to the 4 Cyborg from the first Marathon game. The 4 Cyborg was a genetically engineered 4 who controlled the Sphit in the first game using implants and machines embedded in their exoskeleton. The 4 Cyborg could simultaneously coordinate the behavior of thousands of Sphits remotely, and Durandal asks us to destroy the 4 Cyborg to free the Sphit, an event that triggers the Sphit Revolution. Interestingly, the Hulks, otherwise known as the Drenials from Marathon, don't appear in the game after the defeat of the 4 Cyborg, which led some to speculate that the Drenials, like the Sphit, were controlled by the 4 Cyborg. The 4 Cyborg was commonly called the 4 Controller Cyborg. And Halo Envoy, referring to Hakob, who wielded the Vertex, says the following: "These things in this place could now become a part of him, but he was still the central power, the controller. A residue or whisper from the entity who wore the Vertex 100,000 years prior spoke to Hakob and instructed him to use the Vertex properly, and gave Hakob a glimpse of Sharaquoi undergoing surgery and being implanted with cybernetic implants. While wearing the Vertex, Hakob could even speak through the Sharaquoi using their implants. The Sharaquoi were so strong that Hakob even used them to ravage warthogs in gun emplacements, as they were capable of soaking bullets. Their ability to soak bullets made them practically immune to the warthogs and gun emplacements. At one point, the wearer of the Vertex, Hakob, was sniped, ripping apart his skull and damaging his brain, causing the Sharaquoi to ramble incoherently and wander around aimlessly, confused but curious, leading them to mindlessly attack all those around them without any strategy. This continued until the Forerunner Vertex began to repair the brute wearer, fusing his skull pieces back together and repairing and substituting the damaged parts of his brain. When Hakob was threatened, he recoiled the Sharaquoi to his location to protect himself, and they moved in waves like a coordinated hive of insects to protect their leader. The creatures roared and leapt forward. You might assume that the creatures were slow and lumbering, but they actually were able to leap forward much faster than you might assume. This is where the depiction of the Sharaquoi from Halo and the Hulks from Marathon diverged the most. By comparison, the Hulks from Marathon were extremely slow and extremely lumbering. The Prophets had kept the Sharaquoi shrouded in mystery, but had deliberately created a mythos around them. The Sangheili and some lower-ranking Sanshayim had begged for the Sharaquoi to be released to be used against the humans. It's presumed that the Prophets didn't use them because they lacked the means to control it, having never discovered a Vertex. It is unknown if the Vertex was one of a kind, or if many Vertexes had existed, although I doubt the Forerunners would create multiple hives of Sharaquoi, but only a single device to control them. Hakob, while wielding the Vertex, led an army of Sharaquoi standing side by side with the brutes who followed him, and together they seized several human ships, and without mercy dispatched their crew, arming themselves to ambush several Sangheili ships being repaired on the other side of the planet. Hakob planned to seize the Sharaquoi and go on in the offensive against his enemies, and the enemies of his people, attacking their homeworlds, Sanghelios and Earth. Hakob wished to create an empire unlike any the galaxy had ever seen, one ruled by him, that he desired to grow even larger than that of the Covenant, an empire forged on the backs of the Sharaquoi. When one of his advisors anxiously pleaded with him to flee the planet to safety and call for reinforcements from other affiliated groups, Hakob not only declined, desiring to conquer the planet rather than play it safe, he also mercilessly killed his advisor, using the Sharaquoi under his control to pull his advisor's limbs out of their sockets. A totally horrifying way to die. Ironically, it's conceivable that Hakob's ambition could have been achieved had he only listened to the counsel of his advisor. Technically, the light-year-wide range of the Vertex could have allowed him the flexibility to flee to a remote location, and to continue his campaign in secret and safety. It was this hubris that would prove to be Hakob's downfall. The Shirokoi were such an unstoppable menace, the only way the colonists were able to finally overcome the threat was to strike at Hakob to lure them all to a single location, and then nuke them and the Forerunner Hive from orbit. It's absolutely insane the lengths they had to go to deal with the Shirokoi. I mean, it literally took a nuke. I think we have time for one more anecdote about similarities between the Shirokoi's lore and Marathon's lore. In a key text in Marathon Infinity, we learned that long ago, a Drenial rebellion was launched after a foolish Floor scientist implanted a Jaro cybernetic junction into a Draenor. The words vertex and junction are actually sometimes used as synonyms, and the two terms are often used interchangeably as a singular term for a node within a network. In Halo's lore, the Vertex is a cybernetic implant, similar to the Jaro cybernetic junction. It's unknown as to whether or not any Shirokoi remain alive, but I would kinda doubt 343 would introduce them in a book and then never use them in any other capacity thereafter. I, for one, would love to see them in Halo Infinite, or one of its DLCs. I could see them functioning sort of similar to the Flood combat forms in Halo 3. It would be really awesome after all of these years to finally see them in action. Perhaps the Banished found a supply of them lying around somewhere, or maybe Cortana and the Created stumbled upon some and are letting one of their organic subjects to use the Vertex. Or who knows, maybe there's a different antagonist faction, a Forerunner faction, or maybe somebody else altogether who may use them in Halo Infinite. The Shirokoi were not the first creatures to be cut from a Halo game that were nonetheless canonized. The most notable example were the Engineers, which were originally set to appear in the first Halo game. Despite being cut from the game, the Engineers were referenced in the novel Halo Fall of Reach, and eventually appeared in the games Halo 3 ODST, Halo Reach, and of course Halo Wars 1 and 2. The Thorn Beasts were originally going to be fauna found on Alpha Halo in the first Halo game, and despite being cut from the game, they were referenced in Contact Harvest as a food source used by the Covenant, which was served as both an appetizer and dessert. It was a favorite of the Brutes. Another example are the Blind Wolves, which were formally introduced into the canon in the novel Halo Hunters Into Dark. And then there is also the Flood Juggernaut, which while not introduced in a one-to-one form, was technically a precursor to the Flood pure forms in Halo 3, and inspired many of the design elements in the Flood keymines in the Halo Wars 2 expansion Awakening the Nightmare, and also some smaller Flood forms shown in that expansion's cutscenes. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you considered subscribing, as it would greatly help the channel out. You may also consider checking out some of my other content. I have many Marathon lore videos on this channel, including one on the 4, and a video looking at some of the similarities between the depictions of rampancy in Halo and Marathon. Who knows, you might find something that you like. I want to take a minute to thank Soy7, the creator of the Halo Custom Edition mod, Soy's Single Player Adventure. His Draenor model and tags were used as the base for the Shirokoi in this video. This video was the product of an unspeakable amount of hours troubleshooting and learning how to use Halo Custom Edition's mod tools. So an additional thanks is owed to all of the awesome people who've created and updated Halo Custom Edition's mod tools. Without those tools and dozens of tutorials around the internet, this video simply wouldn't exist. And I can't help but take this opportunity to express how stoked I am that the official mod tools have come to the MCC version of Halo 2 and Halo 3, especially Sapien, and I can't wait to sink my teeth into those tools over the next couple of months, especially having just recently learned to use Halo Custom Edition's mod tools working on this video. I think the tools are going to be a massive boon for both of those games and the MCC community at large over the coming weeks and months. Massive props to the MCC team for continuing to support the game over the last couple of years. It's made a massive difference. And if you're still watching at this point of the video, I owe you a huge thanks as well. Without you, the viewer, this channel simply wouldn't exist. An additional thank you is owed to everyone who's hit the subscriber button.